June 19, 1944, Western Pacific. Beneath a calm and cloud-laden sea, steel hums under pressure. The submarine USS Cavalla glides through 300 feet of darkness, her hull creaking softly like a living creature in pain. Every man aboard is silent, tense, watching gauges tremble. Above them, a thunderous ballet unfolds unseen. Dozens of Japanese carrier aircraft roar toward the Marianas, leaving the faint thrum of propellers pulsing through the deep. Commander Herman Kostler stands over the periscope, whispering bearings. Somewhere north lies the target he's chased for 2 days. A ship that once helped scar Pearl Harbor. Shokaku, pride of the Imperial Navy. Cavalla's torpedo tubes are ready. Compressed air hisses. Sweat trails down young faces in the red light of the control room. Kostler exhales. Fire 1. A dull thump. Fire 2. Fire 3. Steel fish streak toward history. Seconds later, 3 distant cracks ripple through the depths, and the sea trembles. A monster of Japan's fleet is dying, but no one above yet knows who struck the blow, or that this submarine had been presumed gone forever. Its silence had deceived friend and enemy alike. Now, the currents carry us backward, toward the path that led Cavalla to this moment. By the summer of 1944, the Pacific War had entered its decisive tempo. For 3 relentless years, island by island, the United States had clawed back territory that once belonged to the rising sun. Battles that had once been measured in retreat were now measured in miles gained toward Tokyo. In January, the Marshall Islands fell. By May, American forces were probing the Marianas, the stepping stone chain whose airfields could finally bring Japan itself into range of B-29 bombers. The Empire could not allow that. To them, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam were the last line before the homeland. Lose them, and the war's horizon would collapse inward. Behind enemy lines, Admiral Mainichi Koga's vast strategic dream, the decisive battle strategy, had died with him in a plane crash the year before. His successor, Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, now carried Japan's final hope in a plan known as Operation Eigo. It called for a massive carrier strike to trap and destroy the U.S. Fifth Fleet in the Western Pacific. The Japanese carrier arm, Shōkaku, Zuikaku, Taiho, and their escorts, gathered near the Philippine Sea, proud survivors of years of combat. They were collectively called the Mobile Fleet, the beating heart of Imperial naval power. On the other side, Admiral Raymond Spruance's Fifth Fleet moved methodically, its task forces guarding the Saipan invasion. To protect the advancing armada, American submarines were sent ahead. Silent scouts weaving through enemy approaches known as barrier patrols. In this vast ocean chessboard, one such scout, USS Cavalla, SS-244, was dispatched from Pearl Harbor in late May on her first war patrol. Her orders: penetrate the Philippine Sea, locate the enemy's striking force, and report movements to headquarters at Pearl. She was a new machine in a new kind of war. Her steel still unscarred, her crew fresh with ambition but untested by depth charges. While Japan's carriers steamed east, Cavalla slipped west. Within days, she would find herself threading the narrow straits of fate, chasing the shadows of the enemy that would soon dominate the sky above her. Before she could strike, she had to survive becoming invisible. USS Cavalla was built at Groton, Connecticut, commissioned February 29, 1944. A leap-day birth for a vessel that seemed destined for improbable timing. She was a Balao-class submarine, the newest generation of American undersea predators, thicker-hulled, deeper diving, and fitted with improved SJ radar and the more reliable Mark 18 electric torpedoes. Her commander, Lieutenant Commander Herman J. Kostler, had studied the mistakes and lessons of earlier war patrols, the faulty torpedoes, the missed chances, and he drilled his 40-odd crew for quiet precision. By late May, Cavalla's slender hull cut eastward from Pearl Harbor toward the Philippine Sea. The sea lanes teemed with enemy activity. Japanese convoys shuttled oil from Borneo to the home islands. American submarines, once hesitant hunters, were now seasoned killers. Still, each patrol was a lonely gamble. Contact could vanish in a flash of static. Around June 14th, Cavalla rendezvoused at Majuro with Task Force 58, Spruance's massive carrier armada, to refuel and receive final orders. From there, she moved into Sector Charlie of the strike barrier line, east of the Philippines, one small wolf in a long picket stretching hundreds of miles. Headquarters at Pearl tasked her to track anything moving east: destroyers, tankers, carriers, anything hinting at Japan's expected counterblow. 3 days later, radio intelligence began crackling across the fleet. Japanese carriers were underway from Tawi-Tawi in the Sulu Sea. Operation Ago had begun. U.S. codebreakers, reading fragments of enemy transmissions, confirmed that a decisive naval confrontation was coming. On June 18th, Cavalla sighted aircraft, distant wakes, and fuel slicks. She maneuvered cautiously, recording bearings. But that same day, communications with her flickered and ceased. She dove to stay hidden, and the Pacific silence swallowed her signal. For over 24 hours, Pearl Harbor's submarine force lost contact. To tracking officers on the other end of the ocean, the coordinates went still, replaced by a question mark. In headquarters logs, Cavalla was temporarily marked "No further transmissions, presumed lost." And yet, below those calm waters, she was very much alive, stalking something far larger than anyone on land could imagine. Now the stage was set for the meeting of hunter and fleet. The Balao-class submarine was an industrial symphony of steel, electricity, and nerve. Cavalla stretched 301 feet from bow to stern, a sealed world moving through ink. Her 4 diesel engines roared on the surface, but submerged, she relied on battery-powered motors, fading into a near-inaudible hum. At combat depth, that silence was her armor. Everything on board served that silence. Men spoke in low voices, wrapped tools in rags, and timed movements to the pulse of the boat. To exist here meant constant tension. The stale oxygen, the diesel scent soaked into metal, the steady drip of condensation sliding down cold pipes. There were no sunsets, just the red glow of control panels and the steady tick of gauges measuring life. Commander Kostler, only 32, was part of a younger generation of officers molded by lessons of the early war. Gone were the days when U.S. submarines fired faulty torpedoes and fled. The campaign of 1942–43 had been a painful apprenticeship in patience and technology. Now, radar and sonar drew invisible maps of the sea, and the submarine's firepower finally matched its intent. Kostler's approach was calm, meticulous, a blend of scientist and marksman. Tactically, new doctrine emphasized coordinated patrol lines and aggressive attacks on enemy warships, not just merchant shipping. Cavalla's mission near the Marianas fit that new rhythm. Find the carriers, pierce their screen, and deliver a blow strong enough to stagger the Imperial Navy. Below deck, the crew shared a quiet faith in their captain's composure. The service demanded obedience measured in seconds. A wrong order beneath depth charges could crush the hull like a tin drum. Yet humor survived. Crude jokes carved into bulkheads, coffee brewed strong enough to stir the dead, a radio operator sneaking a harmonica tune during surface runs. They were ordinary Americans, electricians, machinists, cooks, suspended above a pressure grave. Each knew the odds. Each carried them silently. Every dive pressed the steel tighter around their souls. But far above those layers of resolve, the enemy they sought believed themselves untouchable. Armored in traditions of samurai and empire, confident their fleet could not be surprised. And so the hunt began between two mentalities: stealth versus pride, the unseen versus the invincible. To understand how Cavalla found her quarry, one must look beyond the periscope to the secret world of signals and strategy. By mid-1944, the U.S. Navy's codebreakers at Pearl Harbor's Station Haipo had become silent architects of victory. They read fragments of Japanese pilot rosters, fuel convoy schedules, and radio call signs. From these clues, they pieced together the outlines of Operation Ago. It was not just tactical intelligence, it was an unfolding story of desperation. The Imperial Japanese Navy believed they were executing a masterstroke. Lure the American carriers east with a feigned strike, then annihilate them with a coordinated surface thrust. Admiral Ozawa's fleet gathered 24 carriers and hundreds of aircraft, the largest concentration Japan could still muster. Yet their flight crews were green, their logistics bleeding dry, and their radar technology lagged far behind. Japan fought not only the U.S. Navy, but the tyranny of dwindling fuel, decaying experience, and the illusion that spirit alone could defy mathematics. Against that pride, American submarines became the unseen conscience of naval warfare. Their task was ruthless: sink without warning, vanish without trace. It was legal under wartime rules, but it carried an existential gravity. Men fired torpedoes at ships they would never see burn. When an enemy carrier went down, its decks were filled with thousands of sailors who faced a choice between fire and water. Each American crewman understood that his silent victory was a human catastrophe on the other side of the periscope. Still, sanction and duty offered no alternatives. Every Japanese carrier destroyed shortened the war and spared future soldiers from beach assaults. Kossler's orders were clear, and morality, like sunlight at 300 feet, reached only faintly. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, radio reports from Ozawa's fleet thundered with pride. No submarine could touch them. Their screens were thick with destroyers and search planes. The Shokaku herself carried an aura of national invincibility. Veteran of Pearl Harbor, Coral Sea, and Santa Cruz. To the Japanese sailors aboard her, the war still seemed a matter of honor and endurance. They could not imagine death stalking quietly beneath the waves. Yet at that moment, Cavalla's hydrophones had already caught the muffled heartbeat of their screws. Pride met patience, and the ocean held its breath once more. Morning of June 18, 1944. The Philippine Sea shimmered under a metallic haze. On Cavalla's bridge, watchmen scanned empty horizons, eyes burning from salt glare. The submarine had already radioed a brief contact report. Enemy planes spotted, possible carriers near her track, before snapping radio silence to avoid detection. That single message reached Pearl Harbor, then cut off. After that, nothing. Minutes later, aircraft shadows swept across the water. Imperial reconnaissance planes, part of Ozawa's advanced screen, had sighted something suspicious. Within hours, destroyers began sweeping broad arcs across the region, sonar pings hammering through the depths like fists on metal doors. Kossler ordered a dive. Ballast tanks hissed. The boat slipped beneath a ceiling of light. Depth 200 feet, then 250. The crew listened, the ocean alive with sound. Destroyer screws rumbled above. The sharp ping of active sonar marched closer. The first depth charge detonated nearby, a concussive roar that shook dust from the ceiling. A second, closer, buckled knees and hurled tools across compartments. Lights flickered red, then steadied. Each man rigid, hands gripping pipes, waiting for the next blossom of destruction. Hours ground by. The Japanese hunted methodically, threading their acoustic nets, certain they'd cornered an American submarine. Cavalla dove deeper, 300 feet, then 350, beyond safe manual charts. Rivets screamed quietly under pressure. Kossler whispered orders. The crew adjusted ballast, conserving power and oxygen. They were entombed in steel, suspended between implosion and discovery. Then, silence. The depth charge patterns faded. The sonar pings receded into distance. The hunters moved on, convinced they'd finished their kill. For 13 bone-tight hours, Cavalla remained still, her pumps dead, her motors cold, her men breathing rationed air that grew thicker by the minute. Back at Pearl Harbor, signals officers interpreted the absence as loss, another patrol gone missing in the vast Pacific. But at 2200 hours, Cavalla rose silently through gradients of darkness. Ballast blew softly. Hatches creaked. The bridge broke the surface beside glittering stars. Above the whispering sea, her antennas rose again. The sub that had died was back among the living, unseen by friend or enemy. Her stealth was absolute. The next day would prove deadly. June 19th, 1944. Dawn of the Battle of the Philippine Sea. All around, the horizon throbbed with distant thunder, the roar of hundreds of carrier aircraft departing Ozawa's fleet for an attack that U.S. aviators would later call the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The Japanese carriers sailed confidently, engines steady, flags snapping in sun-washed haze. Among them, the veteran carrier Shokaku, sleek and immaculate, pride of the Empire's 1st Carrier Division. Her decks, gleaming with freshly launched aircraft, shimmered in the humid light. Far below and several miles east, Kossler brought Cavalla to periscope depth. The scope broke the surface for seconds at a time, a silver tooth against the swell. Through it, he saw a miracle, the immense silhouette of an aircraft carrier flanked by a screen of destroyers. The target filled his entire lens, bearing constant, range closing. Kossler's decision was instant and cold. Set depth at 10 feet. Spread 3. The torpedoman whispered confirmations. Tubes flooded. Compressors rumbled faintly. 10:48 hours. Cavalla's nose pointed directly at Shokaku's starboard bow. Kossler steadied his breathing. Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3. In the control room, the thumps rang like muted heartbeats. The Mark 23 torpedoes sped off, invisible under the blue calm. 3 slender shadows racing toward 30,000 tons of steel. 22 seconds later, the sea erupted. A triple concussion slammed the depths, reverberating through Cavalla's hull and across the Philippine Sea. Through the periscope, Kossler glimpsed chaos, a towering geyser of flame and oil splitting Shokaku's midsection. Her deck plates peeled upward. A smoke column coiled skyward. Secondary explosions followed as aviation fuel ignited in her hangars. Japanese destroyers reacted in fury, dropping depth charges in frenzied retaliation. Cavalla dived immediately, descending through trembling water. The counterattack was savage. For over 5 hours, 50-odd explosions battered her hull. Rivets swept seawater, but Kossler's crew stayed calm, maneuvering in tightening circles, maintaining silent running, trusting physics more than prayer. At 1700 hours, the last charges faded. The ocean lay eerily still. Above, Shokaku was gone, sunk with over 1,200 of her crew, including many who had launched the first waves over Pearl Harbor. The pride of the Japanese fleet had died under the guns of a submarine presumed dead itself only a day earlier. When Cavalla finally surfaced that night, her crew stood speechless under a violet sky. They had changed the course of a battle without ever being seen. But even victory under the sea leaves echoes of dread, because silence always asks for a price. News of the Shokaku's loss did not reach Tokyo immediately. In the first hours after the strike, the Imperial Japanese fleet struggled simply to understand what had happened. From a distance, sailors aboard Shōkaku saw the explosion and rising plume, but assumed an American bomb had struck. No submarine contact had been reported. Their destroyer screens were considered impenetrable. Before the sun set on June 19th, the truth became undeniable. One of Japan's oldest surviving carriers, a ship that had fought at Pearl Harbor, Coral Sea, and the Santa Cruz Islands, had been split apart by torpedoes. Its destruction crippled not only Ozawa's strength, but also the pride of the Imperial Navy. Japan's admirals clung to what planes and pilots remained, But the attrition that day was apocalyptic. Hundreds of aircraft were lost in combat against U.S. carrier fighters. Those that survived found no decks to land on. For the crewmen afloat among oil and debris, rescue came hours late under an unforgiving sun. Few were recovered. Many were swallowed by the same ocean their navy claimed to rule. The Imperial command, once boastful that a submarine could never breach their screens, now faced a terrifying truth. The Americans' long-taunted undersea fleet had matured into a precision weapon. Far away at Pearl Harbor, Cavalla's single triumph flashed through coded channels. Commanders who had already written her off as missing suddenly saw her call sign burn across the board. Alive, reporting an aircraft carrier sunk. The silence that had implied death became proof of historic victory. Within hours, Costler's secret message reached Admiral Lockwood, commander of the Pacific Submarine Force. His reply was succinct. "Well done, Cavalla. You have struck a major blow." As Cavalla slipped eastward to resume her silent patrol, the sea around her still shimmered with smoke and debris from the shattered Shokaku. The balance of naval power in the Pacific had just shifted, even if few yet realized it. Victory never sounded so quiet. In strategic terms, the loss of Shokaku was just one piece of a much larger collapse. Locked above, the remaining Japanese carrier force fought through June 20th beneath skies swarming with American aircraft. The Taiho, Ozawa's new flagship, had already been mortally wounded that same day by another U.S. submarine, USS Albacore. Hours later, leaking aviation fuel exploded deep inside her hangars, another blaze across the horizon for observers like Cavalla. By nightfall, Ozawa's once grand mobile fleet was a shadow of itself. 3 carriers sunk, hundreds of aircraft destroyed, thousands of trained aircrew lost. Japan's capacity to wage carrier warfare, its proudest naval invention, was effectively finished. The Battle of the Philippine Sea was no mere tactical success. It was the decisive end of Japan's offensive reach. When Cavalla returned to Fremantle, Australia in early July, her hull still bore scratches from near misses, her paint blistered by depth charge concussion. In the tight submarine piers, crews cheered her arrival. Sailors crowded her deck as word spread. A first patrol boat had sunk one of the Empire's largest carriers. The Navy's photography unit recorded her captain receiving the Navy Cross, while her crew posed in the bright Australian sun, squinting into cameras with the quiet pride of men who knew exactly how close they'd come to vanishing. For the enemy, Shokaku's loss was quietly erased from public news. Tokyo radio mentioned only that contact had ceased. Yet inside Japan's naval circles, an unspoken mourning spread. The legends of Pearl Harbor's glory had ended, not in grand surface battle, but under a black sea struck by unseen hands. Back in Washington, naval strategists studied Cavalla's patrol report, marking it as evidence that submarine warfare had evolved into a decisive instrument of high strategy. Precision, patience, and stealth had replaced chance and brute force. The Pacific's future was now whispering from periscope depth, and it whispered with a single truth. In modern war, those thought dead could still decide the fate of empires. History remembers the clang of great guns and the thunder of armies advancing. Yet sometimes, the sound that changes everything is silence. The hush inside a steel hull. The stillness before a torpedo leaves its tube. USS Cavalla's moment in the Philippine Sea endures because it captured the essence of 20th century war. Technology fused with nerve, intellect hidden beneath anonymity. When Costler and his men slipped away from the wreckage of Shokaku, they had no parade, no witnesses, no applause. Theirs was a victory wrapped in secrecy. Only after surfacing weeks later did they learn the carrier they struck had been the same ship that loosed aircraft upon Pearl Harbor. It was a circle drawn not in vengeance alone, but in the hard arithmetic of survival. The broader war rolled on through Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, But after June 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy would never again launch a full carrier fleet. In that sense, what Cavalla achieved with 3 torpedoes from the deep was a quiet turning of history's wheel. Submarines, once seen as peripheral weapons, had become arbiters of sea power. Their silence dictated movement. Their stealth toppled titans. Behind each sonar ping lay the intellect of engineers who had turned pressure and mathematics into invisible dominance. Beneath each depth charge lay the heartbeat of men who learned to trust steel against the weight of an ocean. For those who fought in the undersea war, there was no glory march, only the haunting rhythm of the sea itself, vast and indifferent. But within that indifference, courage took a different shape. Patience, discipline, and the ability to remain unseen until the moment truly mattered. The Cavalla's tale stands as a reminder that history's loudest turning points sometimes occur in perfect quiet, deep enough that only time can hear them. And somewhere, in that eternal hush beneath the Pacific, the echo still lingers, of a submarine thought dead, and of an empire forced to listen.